It all started innocently enough. With Tom away on a business trip that would keep him overseas for over a month, I found myself struggling to fill the sudden quiet in the house. Tom had always been the grounding presence in my life, my best friend as well as my husband, and without him around, the silence was unsettling. I would have managed fine, of course, but the idea of going day after day, without much social interaction, was daunting. So when our close family friend, Alex, offered to come by and check in from time to time, I was grateful. Alex had been part of our lives since college, a constant companion who'd seen us through ups and downs. He was Tom's best friend and practically a member of our family. If anyone could keep me company without it being strange, it was him. On the first night he came over, we shared a casual dinner, laughing over stories about Tom and reminiscing about all the years we'd known each other. Alex had a way of making everything feel lighthearted, and for a while, the weight of Tom's absence felt a little less heavy. "Don't worry, Emily," Alex said, flashing me one of his easy smiles. "The month will go by in a flash. Tom will be back before you know it." I nodded, smiling back. "Thanks, Alex. It's nice to have someone around to keep me sane." He laughed, and for a moment, I felt an odd flicker of something I hadn't expected. I brushed it off, convincing myself it was just the result of missing Tom. But as the days went by, that feeling grew stronger, and I found myself looking forward to Alex's visits in a way I hadn't anticipated. Over the next few weeks, Alex came over more frequently. Sometimes we'd have dinner, other times we'd just sit on the couch, talking late into the night about everything and nothing. It was easy, comfortable, like slipping into a well-worn rhythm. But as our conversations deepened, I began to notice things I hadn't before. The way he looked at me, the warmth in his gaze that lingered a little too long, the casual touches that felt more intimate than they should have. One evening, as we were finishing up a movie, I felt him watching me, his gaze intense. I looked over, meeting his eyes, and for a moment, the air between us felt charged, filled with an unspoken tension. "Emily," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. I know this might sound strange, but I just want you to know that I'm here for you. Whatever you need." There was something in his tone, a depth of emotion that made my heart skip a beat. I swallowed, trying to keep my composure. "Thank you, Alex. I appreciate it. Really." He reached out, his hand covering mine in a gesture that was both comforting and electrifying. I felt a rush of emotions, a mixture of longing and guilt that left me breathless. I pulled my hand away, forcing a smile, trying to ignore the way my heart was racing. I should get some sleep," I said, standing up, my voice shaky. "It's getting late." He nodded, his gaze lingering on me for a moment longer before he stood up as well. "Of course. I'll see you soon, Emily." As I watched him leave, I felt a strange mixture of relief and disappointment, a longing that I knew I shouldn't feel. But the more I tried to ignore it, the stronger it grew, and I found myself wondering what it meant, and where it might lead. Days turned into weeks, and my feelings for Alex became harder to ignore. He continued to come by, always respectful, always kind, but there was an unspoken tension between us that grew stronger with each visit. I knew it was wrong, knew that my loyalty was to Tom, but the loneliness and the quiet thrill of Alex's attention made it difficult to stay away. One evening, as we were cleaning up after dinner, he turned to me, his expression serious. "Emily, there's something I need to say." I looked at him, my heart pounding. "What is it?" He hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I don't want to make you uncomfortable, but I think I've been feeling something I shouldn't. Being here, spending time with you, it's been harder than I thought." The honesty in his words struck a chord, and I felt a wave of emotions wash over me. Guilt, fear, but also a quiet, undeniable thrill. "Alex, He looked up, his eyes filled with a mix of longing and regret. "I'm sorry, Emily. I didn't mean to complicate things. I care about you. More than I should." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the weight of everything we couldn't say. I wanted to tell him that I felt it too, that the feelings I had been trying to ignore were just as real for me as they were for him. But the thought of betraying Tom held me back, reminding me of the line we were about to cross. "I care about you too, Alex," I said finally, my voice barely a whisper.
But
"I don't know if this is right." He nodded, a sad smile tugging at his lips. "I understand. I don't want to make things harder for you. Maybe it's best if I give you some space." The thought of him leaving, of ending whatever this was, filled me with a sense of loss that was almost unbearable. But I knew he was right. We were playing with fire, and if we weren't careful, we'd end up burning everything to the ground. Despite our decision to keep our distance, I found myself longing for Alex's presence, for the quiet comfort he brought into my life. Tom's absence felt heavier than ever, a constant reminder of the emptiness that had settled over our home. And no matter how hard I tried to push away my feelings, they refused to fade. Then, one evening, as I was finishing up some work in the kitchen, I heard a knock at the door. My heart skipped a beat as I opened it, and there he was, standing in the doorway, his expression filled with the same longing and uncertainty that mirrored my own. "Alex," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I thought we agreed." "I know," he interrupted, stepping inside, his gaze intense. "But I couldn't stay away, Emily. I tried, but I can't ignore what I feel for you." The words hung in the air, each one a step closer to the line we had promised not to cross. I looked at him, my heart racing, and in that moment, the world around us seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of us, bound by a connection we couldn't deny. Without thinking, I reached out, my hand finding his, and in that moment, all the doubts and fears melted away. Our lips met in a kiss that was both desperate and tender, a silent confession of everything we had been holding back. But as we stood there, lost in each other, I felt a pang of guilt, a reminder of the promise I had made to Tom. I pulled away, my breath shaky, the reality of our actions crashing down on me. "Alex, we can't, this is wrong," I murmured, my voice filled with regret. He looked at me, his expression torn. "I know, but I don't know how to stop." The silence that followed was filled with unspoken words, a reminder of the line we had crossed and the consequences that awaited us. And as I looked into his eyes, I knew that our lives would never be the same. The day after our kiss, I tried to go about my usual routine, telling myself that it had been a momentary lapse, a mistake that could be forgotten. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the memory of Alex's touch, the feeling of his hands holding mine, the way he looked at me with such raw emotion. The more I thought about it, the harder it was to ignore the pull I felt towards him, and the more impossible it became to pretend that everything was normal. I avoided his calls for a few days, hoping that a little distance would help clear my mind. But every time my phone buzzed, my heart skipped a beat, and I found myself tempted to answer, to let him back into my life, even though I knew it was wrong. The guilt gnawed at me, a constant reminder of the line we had crossed and the promises I was supposed to keep. Then, one evening, as I was cleaning up after dinner, the doorbell rang. My heart pounded as I walked to the door, knowing even before I opened it that it would be Alex. He stood there, looking tired and uncertain, his hands shoved into his pockets. "Emily," he said softly, his voice filled with a mixture of regret and longing. I couldn't stay away." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. "Alex, we can't keep doing this. It's not fair to Tom. He trusts us." He nodded, looking down. "I know. I hate that I'm putting you in this position. But, Emily, I can't ignore what I feel." His words struck a chord, and I felt my resolve waver. I knew I should send him away, tell him that we needed to stop, but the thought of losing him, of going back to the empty, quiet days without his presence, was too painful to bear. "Alex, I feel it too," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't know if we can keep this up." He looked at me, his gaze filled with a mixture of relief and sorrow. "Maybe we don't have to decide right now. Just let me be here for you, just as a friend." It was a dangerous promise, one that I knew could only lead to more heartache, but as I looked into his eyes, I found myself nodding, unable to deny the quiet longing that had settled deep within me. In the days that followed, Alex and I fell into a routine, one that felt both comforting and dangerous. He would come over a few evenings a week, helping me with household chores, making dinner together, and talking late into the night. It was easy, almost too easy, to forget the boundaries that separated us, to let myself believe that our connection was harmless. But with each passing day, the tension between us grew stronger, a silent understanding that neither of us dared to voice. Every glance, every accidental touch was charged with an unspoken desire, a promise that lingered in the air long after he'd left. One evening, as we were sitting on the couch, laughing over some old stories, I found myself leaning closer, my heart pounding as our hands brushed. The touch was brief, barely noticeable, but it sent a thrill through me, a reminder of everything we couldn't have. He looked at me, his gaze intense, and for a moment, I forgot everything, the promises I'd made, the loyalty I owed to Tom. All I could think about was the way Alex's eyes lingered on mine, the warmth of his hand resting beside mine, so close yet so far. "Emily," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "I don't know if I can keep pretending that this is enough." I swallowed, my heart racing as I met his gaze. "Alex," Before I could finish, his lips were on mine, soft and warm, and I felt myself melting into the kiss, losing myself in the moment. It was wrong, so deeply wrong, but the thrill of it, the forbidden nature of our connection, was too powerful to resist. We pulled back, both of us breathing heavily, the reality of what we had done settling over us like a weight. This can't happen again," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Tom, he trusts us." Alex looked at me, his expression torn. "I know. But, Emily, I can't let go of this. Of you." The words hung between us, filled with a mixture of longing and regret, and I knew that we were past the point of no return. Whatever line we had crossed, there was no going back. As the days went on, I found myself living in a state of constant tension, torn between the life I'd built with Tom and the connection I shared with Alex. Every moment with Alex felt like a betrayal, but the thought of letting him go, of returning to a life without him, was too painful to bear. Then, one evening, just as Alex and I were finishing up dinner, I heard the sound of a car pulling up outside. My heart skipped a beat, a sense of dread settling over me as I realized that Tom was back, days earlier than expected. "Emily, I'm home." Tom's voice called from the doorway, his tone filled with warmth and excitement. Panic surged through me as I looked at Alex, both of us frozen in place, the reality of our situation crashing down on us. I could feel the blood draining from my face, my mind racing as I tried to think of an explanation, a way to hide the truth. Tom entered the kitchen, a warm smile on his face, but his expression shifted as he took in the scene. The two of us standing together, too close, our faces pale with guilt. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice filled with a hint of suspicion. I forced a smile, my heart pounding as I tried to keep my voice steady. "Nothing, Tom. Alex was just helping me with dinner." Tom's gaze flickered between us, a flicker of doubt crossing his face.
"Right.
Just helping?" The silence that followed was suffocating, filled with an unspoken tension that hung heavy in the air. I could see the suspicion in Tom's eyes, the questions he was too afraid to ask, and I knew that whatever trust we had once shared was crumbling, replaced by a sense of betrayal that couldn't be ignored. In the days that followed, Tom's behavior grew more distant, his gaze filled with quiet suspicion. I could feel the weight of our secret pressing down on me, a constant reminder of the line we had crossed and the life we had put at risk. I wanted to tell him the truth, to confess and beg for his forgiveness, but the thought of losing him, of destroying everything we had built, held me back. Then, one evening, as Tom was supposed to be out with friends, he came home early again, catching me and Alex in the kitchen, our hands brushing as we laughed over an old memory. The look on Tom's face was one of shock and hurt, a realization dawning in his eyes that cut through me like a knife. "Emily, what's going on here?" he demanded, his voice filled with a mixture of anger and betrayal. I opened my mouth to speak, to try to explain, but no words came. There was nothing I could say to make this right, nothing that could undo the damage we had caused. Tom looked at Alex, his gaze hardening. "I trusted you," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "You were supposed to be my friend." The silence that followed was unbearable, filled with the weight of everything we had destroyed. I looked at Tom, seeing the hurt and anger in his eyes, and I knew that our lives would never be the same. After that night, everything changed. Tom's gaze, once warm and trusting, was now filled with a mixture of hurt and betrayal. He didn't yell or demand answers. He didn't even leave the room when Alex tried to apologize, to explain. Instead, Tom sat there, his expression unreadable, his silence more painful than any words he could have spoken. "Tom," I whispered, my voice shaking. I'm so sorry. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a depth of pain I'd never seen before. "A mistake," he repeated, his tone flat. "With my best friend?" Alex shifted beside me, his face pale, his expression a mixture of regret and shame. "Tom, I didn't mean for this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you." Tom's gaze flickered to Alex, a cold intensity in his eyes. "You didn't mean for this to happen? You were supposed to be my friend, Alex. I trusted you. I trusted both of you." The weight of his words settled over us like a shroud, a painful reminder of the trust we had broken, the life we had thrown away. I wanted to say something, to try to make things right, but the silence that followed was suffocating, a reminder that some mistakes could never be undone. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in our home was tense and unbearable. Tom avoided me, his presence a constant reminder of the line I had crossed, the trust one had shattered. He barely spoke, his responses curt and distant, and every glance he gave me was filled with a silent accusation that cut me to the core. I tried to talk to him, to apologize, but he wouldn't listen. His silence was worse than any words he could have spoken, a reminder that our relationship was hanging by a thread and that I was the one who had severed it. As for Alex, he stopped coming by altogether. I didn't blame him. His absence was a painful reminder of everything we had lost, a void that only made the silence in our home more pronounced. But even though I knew it was for the best, a part of me missed him, missed the comfort he had once brought into my life. One evening, unable to stand the silence any longer, I approached Tom as he sat alone in the living room, his expression distant, his gaze fixed on the wall. "Tom, please," I began, my voice trembling. Can we talk about this?" He looked at me, his eyes cold and guarded. "What's there to talk about, Emily? You betrayed me. You and Alex. I don't even know who you are anymore." The accusation hit me like a blow, and I felt a surge of guilt wash over me. "I know I hurt you, Tom, and I can't change that. But I still love you. I want to make things right." He laughed bitterly, a sound filled with bitterness and pain. "Make things right? How, Emily? By pretending this never happened? By forgetting that you betrayed me with my best friend?" The word stung, a painful reminder of the choices I had made, and I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice barely audible. I never wanted this to happen. I was lonely, and I made a mistake." He looked away, his expression filled with a mixture of anger and sadness. "A mistake? That's what you call it?" The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the weight of everything we couldn't say. I wanted to reach out to him, to tell him that I was willing to do whatever it took to make things right, but I knew that it was too late. The damage was done, and there was no going back. In the days that followed, Tom's distance became more pronounced. He began staying out late, coming home only to sleep, his presence a reminder of the life we had lost, the love we had thrown away. I tried to reach out to him, to bridge the gap that had grown between us, but he remained closed off, his silence a wall that I couldn't penetrate. Then, one evening, he sat me down, his expression serious, his gaze filled with a mixture of pain and resolve. "Emily," he began, his voice steady but cold. "I think it's best if we take a break. I can't keep living like this, pretending that everything's okay when it's not." The words hit me like a blow, a painful reminder of the life we had thrown away, the love we had taken for granted. I wanted to beg him to stay, to give me a chance to make things right, but I knew that it was too late. "I understand," I murmured, my voice barely a whisper. I'm so sorry, Tom. For everything." He looked at me, his gaze filled with a mixture of sadness and anger. "Sorry doesn't fix this, Emily. You didn't just hurt me. You destroyed everything." With that, he stood up, walking out of the room without a backward glance, leaving me alone with the weight of my choices, the silence a reminder of the life I had thrown away. In the days that followed, the reality of my actions settled over me like a shroud. I moved into a small apartment, leaving behind the home that had once been filled with love and laughter. Tom refused to speak to me, cutting off all contact, and I knew that I had no right to ask for forgiveness. I had betrayed him in the worst possible way, and there was no way to make it right. The silence of my new life was suffocating, filled with memories of what I had lost and the choices that had led me here. I found myself replaying every moment, every decision, wondering how things had gone so wrong, how I had let myself fall so far. As for Alex, he disappeared from my life as quickly as he had entered it. I heard through mutual friends that he had moved back to his hometown, trying to piece his life back together, and I knew that I would likely never see him again. He was a ghost from my past, a painful reminder of the line I had crossed and the life I had thrown away. As the weeks turned into months, I tried to move on, to build a new life from the ruins of my mistakes. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the weight of my choices, the guilt that haunted me at every turn. I found myself staring at the empty walls of my apartment, lost in memories of a life that could have been, a future that would never come to pass. I knew that I had only myself to blame, that I had made my choices and now had to live with the consequences. But the regret, the pain of knowing what I had lost, was a constant reminder of the life I had thrown away, the love I had taken for granted. And as the days turned into months, I realized that I would carry the weight of that choice for the rest of my life, a silent punishment for the betrayal that had shattered everything.